What if the most powerful governments on Earth tried to weaponize the human mind? Not through guns or bombs, but through thoughts, invisible, untraceable, unstoppable. Imagine intelligence agencies not sending agents into enemy territory, but projecting them there, using nothing but the force of their own consciousness. Sounds like science fiction, right? Before we dive into this unbelievable story, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me, where are you watching from? And what time is it where you are right now? Because once you hear what happened during the Cold War, you'll realize sleep won't come easy tonight. It began quietly, almost accidentally. In 1972, a series of Soviet scientific papers reached American intelligence desks. They described something called psychotronic energy, a mysterious field said to connect all living beings, capable of influencing thoughts, emotions, even matter itself. The Soviets were investing heavily in it, calling it biocommunication. The CIA panicked. Washington couldn't afford to be behind. Not in space, not in nukes, and certainly not in the unseen battlefield of the mind. What if Moscow had discovered a way to spy without spies? Soon, deep in the archives of Fort Meade, Maryland, a classified project was born, Stargate. Not a movie, not a fantasy, a real U.S. Army program designed to explore remote viewing. Agents were trained to visualize distant locations with startling accuracy. They called it seeing with the mind's eye. Among them were ex-soldiers, artists, scientists, even psychics, who swore they could read coordinates hidden in sealed envelopes or describe Soviet missile sites from across the ocean. Some called them frauds. Others called them visionaries. In an underground lab in Menlo Park, California, two physicists, Russell Targ and Harold Pothoff, began testing a man named Ingo Swann, a New York artist with an unexplainable ability. They placed him in a sealed room, far from any signals or maps, and asked him to describe a location they'd randomly chosen. Swann paused, closed his eyes, and began to speak. There's a domed structure, metal framework, under construction. I see a gantry. The coordinates? A secret Soviet site at Semipalatinsk, home to a classified radar dome. When satellite photos arrived weeks later, analysts froze. The description was disturbingly accurate. Coincidence? Or proof that the human mind could pierce secrecy itself? While the CIA was probing the supernatural, the KGB was going even further. Across the Iron Curtain, in Moscow's Institute of Brain Research, Soviet scientists were running their own experiments with far fewer ethical limits. They studied telepathic influence, hypnotic control, and something they called biolocation. Soldiers were tested for psychic sensitivity. Prisoners were used as subjects. According to declassified Western reports, the Soviets hoped to train operatives who could influence enemy decision-makers remotely, planting thoughts, inducing confusion, or draining morale. A weapon with no fingerprints. Britain, meanwhile, quietly joined the race. MI6 and the Ministry of Defense ran a short-lived study called Project Blue Bolt, testing whether psychics could locate missing weapons or downed aircraft. The results were inconclusive, but one report described a medium who allegedly sketched the outline of a crashed jet. Debris field weeks before it was found. Officially, the government dismissed it. Unofficially, the file was buried under eyes only. By the late 1970s, the world's most advanced militaries were fighting an invisible war. While tanks rolled across Europe and missiles gleamed in silos, intelligence chiefs whispered about mind spies. They called them viewers, senders, receivers. Each session began the same way. A dark room, a quiet breath, a sealed envelope on a desk. Inside, a photo or set of coordinates only the observer knew. The subject sat miles away, sometimes hundreds of miles, sketching what came to mind. Sometimes nonsense, sometimes terrifyingly real. In one now famous case, A U.S. Army remote viewer named Joseph McMonigle was tasked with describing a target of interest. He drew a series of massive cylindrical objects, half buried in the ground near the Ural Mountains. He said they were some sort of giant missiles under construction. The target turned out to be the Soviet Typhoon-class nuclear submarine program, information not yet confirmed by any satellite imagery. A year later, reconnaissance photos matched his sketches almost perfectly. Even hardened skeptics inside the Pentagon admitted something strange was happening, but not all experiments stayed clean. The deeper the agencies went, the more dangerous the obsession became. In 1983, declassified documents revealed that the CIA and Army intelligence began exploring psychic countermeasures, ways to shield the mind from remote intrusion. Some agents were reportedly kept in isolation, subjected to sensory deprivation tanks, meditation regimens, and rhythmic sound patterns meant to alter brainwaves. They called it mental armor. The line between science and mysticism blurred. And yet, behind every classified file, there was a question that haunted both sides. If these powers were real, where did they come from? Religion? Evolution? The Soviets turned to ancient shamanic traditions and Eastern mysticism. The Americans leaned on quantum physics and parapsychology. Each tried to explain what they couldn't measure. Some whispered that consciousness itself was a weapon, that the universe was one giant field of information waiting to be hacked. By the mid-1980s, the Cold War psychic race had reached its strangest chapter. Soviet generals allegedly tested long-distance telepathic communication between submarines, even while submerged beneath Arctic ice. American labs at Stanford Research Institute refined remote viewing protocols that the DIA later used in real missions. Reports surfaced of psychic tracking attempts, trying to locate hostages, drug shipments, or missing aircraft. Some failed. Others hit eerily close. But not everyone wanted this power exposed. In 1987, several program insiders began to question what they'd seen. One former viewer, Pat Price, died suddenly under mysterious circumstances after claiming he could see classified KGB facilities through his mind. Another, Ingo Swann, walked away, saying the experiments had gone too far. In an interview years later, he hinted that the human mind wasn't the only thing being observed, that something was watching them back. Meanwhile, deep inside the KGB's Lubyanka headquarters, a classified report landed on the desk of General Oleg Kaludin. It warned that psychic espionage was a double-edged sword. Untrained minds could collapse under mental stress. Strong ones could turn unpredictable. It was said that some viewers began reporting visions they couldn't explain, events that hadn't yet happened, but later came true. Time, it seemed, didn't always play by the rules inside the human mind. By the time the Berlin Wall fell, most of these programs were officially shut down. The CIA's Stargate Project was declassified in 1995, labeled inconclusive. The Soviets, too, claimed to have abandoned psychic research. But insiders told another story, that both sides simply rebranded, moving deeper underground as technology advanced. Why spend billions on satellites when you could train minds to spy where machines couldn't reach? Today, fragments of those projects still surface. Blurred documents, half-redacted memos, transcripts of remote viewing sessions describing places that didn't exist until they did. In 2001, a FOIA request uncovered an old Stargate report describing a viewer who saw a complex underground facility in North Korea years before it was publicly known. Another report described biolocation attempts in Iraq during the Gulf War. Even after official closure, the work quietly continued. And maybe it still does, because every intelligence agency knows one truth. Power isn't just about weapons, it's about information. And if information can be seen, sensed, or stolen through, means no one can explain. That's the ultimate edge. Some say the psychic programs were failures. Others say they evolved. Into algorithms, into neuroscience, into AI-driven cognitive warfare. Perhaps the battle for the human mind never ended. It simply changed its name. So next time you hear someone laugh about mind control or psychic spies, remember this: hundreds of millions of dollars, decades of research, and some of the most brilliant scientists of the 20th century believed there was something there, something powerful enough to terrify governments. The Cold War might have ended, but the war for the human mind? That one never stopped. And as we move next, we'll ask the question that no one dared to during those experiments. What if those who learned to see beyond the veil never stopped looking back? They said the psychic wars ended when the Cold War did. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, the laboratories went dark, the files were sealed, and the dream of weaponizing the mind was over. But history has a way of keeping its deepest secrets buried, not erased. And when it comes to the human mind, nothing truly ends. It just changes shape. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Because what you're about to hear isn't just history. It's the beginning of something far stranger. In 1995, when the CIA officially terminated the Stargate Project, most of its records were declassified. But analysts who worked on those files noticed something odd. Hundreds of pages missing, entire segments redacted with thick black ink. When questioned, officials claimed the content had no scientific value, yet the redactions appeared exactly where experiments had shown the most unusual results. Some researchers whispered that Stargate hadn't failed. It had succeeded just enough to vanish. At the same time, former Soviet scientists reappeared in strange places, consulting for private defense contractors, biotech startups, and energy companies. Among them were men who once led psychotronic divisions in Moscow and Leningrad. They claimed to have moved on from telepathy to neuro-influence systems, blending brainwave research with electromagnetic resonance. The new goal wasn't to read minds. It was to guide them. By the late 1990s, the world was entering a new kind of war. One fought not for land, but for information. And if the psychic spies of the past tried to see across distance, their modern counterparts sought to see across data. Artificial intelligence, behavioral prediction, cognitive manipulation, all born from the same obsession: controlling thought. Documents leaked years later hinted that certain military labs in both the US and Russia continued low profile consciousness interaction studies. They used new terms like non-local awareness, targeted cognitive, modeling, and biofield interface. Same goals, new language. There were whispers that the Vatican archives received renewed attention from intelligence agencies, not for religious reasons, but because ancient manuscripts mentioned states of consciousness lost to time. Some even suggested that the Jesuits, who once studied the power of meditation and ritual focus, had unknowingly mapped what scientists would later call altered brainwave patterns. History had come full circle. The mystics and the spies were now chasing the same ghost. In London, a short-lived collaboration known as the Templar Initiative emerged between British defense analysts and neuroscientists from Oxford. The project studied whether belief itself could alter decision-making at a distance, if shared symbols could synchronize emotional responses across groups. It was framed as social psychology, but those who saw the early memos said it smelled of something older, the dream of collective control. The files disappeared after 2003. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the U.S. Army quietly funded research into what they called enhanced situational intuition. Officially, it was about improving soldier awareness. Unofficially, it looked a lot like remote perception training. The recruits were taught meditation, visualization, and intuitive mapping. The idea wasn't to create psychics, but to teach the brain to notice patterns the conscious mind ignored. Some of those trainees later swore their instincts saved lives in combat zones. Coincidence or echoes of Stargate's legacy? In Moscow, a different story unfolded. A small private firm, founded by former defense researchers, began selling a device called the cerebrum resonator. It claimed to boost concentration through electromagnetic tuning. Western intelligence agencies dismissed it as pseudoscience, until they discovered that the company's founders had once worked in the same KGB labs that studied mind influence. The patent-cited technology first developed under state sponsorship in the 1980s. When journalists tried to interview them, the founders vanished. By the 2010s, the myth of psychic espionage had merged with the age of surveillance. Conspiracy forums buzzed about neuroweapons and digital telepathy. Governments denied everything. But the technology of influence no longer needed clairvoyance. It had algorithms, data, and neurofeedback. Mind control wasn't a crystal ball anymore. It was your screen, your feed, your thoughts subtly nudged by invisible patterns of color, tone, and timing. The battlefield had shifted from the brain to the network, but the effect was the same: unseen manipulation. Still, some veterans of the old programs swore that the pure form of psychic spying never died. One retired U.S. Army viewer once told a journalist, "They didn't stop us because we failed. They stopped us because it worked too well." He claimed there were still unofficial units operating under private contracts, locating missing persons, predicting terrorist attacks, or scanning underground facilities in North Korea and Iran. Nothing proven, nothing admitted. But even a whisper from an intelligence veteran carries weight. And then came one of the strangest leaks of all. In 2016, a declassified memo appeared in the CIA's FOIA reading room, a translation of a Soviet document dated 1983. It described a program called Project Raven. According to the text, the KGB had trained a small group of operatives who combined hypnosis, biofeedback, and suggestion to extract information from captured agents without drugs, without torture. They simply talked, until the subject began to reveal everything, as if guided by invisible strings. The memo ended abruptly, but one line stood out. They do not break under pressure, they open, as if they were never closed. Across the ocean, in China, another mystery emerged. A series of leaked patents in 2019 described non-contact neural modulation, devices capable of influencing specific brainwave frequencies remotely. Officially, these were for medical therapy, but researchers noticed something familiar in the language: the same biocommunication theories once used in Soviet ESP papers. It seemed the race for the mind was back, dressed in the language of neuroscience. As you listen to this, remember, history doesn't repeat itself, it reinvents itself. The tools have changed, but the ambition is eternal: to see without being seen, to know without asking, to control without appearing to. The psychic spies of the Cold War might have faded into rumor, but the hunger that created them has found new life in code, cognition, and covert research. And somewhere out there, behind locked doors, a handful of researchers are still asking the same forbidden question: what if consciousness itself is a weapon, one that can never be disarmed? Because maybe the real secret isn't that governments tried to train psychic spies. Maybe it's that they succeeded just long enough to realize the danger of what they created, and instead of destroying it, they buried it deep inside the future. So tell me, what do you think? Were the psychic spies of the Cold War real? Are they gone? Or just watching us from somewhere we can't yet see? Like, share, and subscribe, because in the next story, we'll follow this thread into the modern age, where intelligence agencies stopped looking outward and started turning their gaze inside the human mind itself.